Today, we're diving into one of the absolute strangest and most tragic industrial disasters in American history. It's a story that involves a totally mundane substance, a whole lot of corporate negligence, and the deadly, deadly power of basic physics when people decide to ignore it.
So let's just start with a number. 21. That's how many people lost their lives in this catastrophe.
Now, you're probably thinking, okay, some sort of factory fire, a typical explosion, maybe the kind of building collapse you might imagine. But nope, the cause was something, well, something far more bizarre. That's right, a flood of molasses. How on earth could a substance you put on pancakes become a weapon of mass destruction? Well, that is the exact question we're going to answer. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's a chilly winter day in Boston, January 15th, 1919. In this densely packed working-class neighborhood, there's this massive 5-story high steel tank. And it's filled to the brim with millions of liters of molasses, just waiting to be turned into industrial alcohol. And then, without any warning, it just fails. The scale of this failure it's just mind-boggling. We're talking over 12,000 tons of this thick, gooey liquid erupting outwards. And this wasn't some slow ooze, no way. This was an explosive blast that created a wave almost 50 feet high, rocketing through the city streets at 35 miles an hour. The sound, that was the first sign of the horror. A deafening, metallic roar as the tank's seams just ripped apart. And that was immediately followed by the sight of this colossal, dark brown wall of liquid energy just swallowing everything in its path. The force was just immense. It was powerful enough to completely demolish buildings, to snap the steel girders of an elevated train track like they were twigs, and even hurl freight cars right into the harbor. A nearby firehouse was completely crushed, killing several firefighters inside. The human toll was immediate and absolutely devastating. 21 people dead and more than 150 injured. So you have to ask, how does a simple storage tank fail so catastrophically? Well, this wasn't some unforeseeable accident. It was the predictable, almost guaranteed result of a whole series of terrible decisions. You know, this tank was pretty much doomed from day one. It was rushed into service without any proper engineering oversight. The steel walls? Way too thin. And they didn't have enough manganese, which made them incredibly brittle in the cold. It was so poorly built that it was leaking constantly. And apparently, nobody had bothered to account for the immense pressure that all that molasses would exert. And this just shows you how normalized the problem had become. The tank's leaks were literally a neighborhood feature. People would bring buckets down to collect the free molasses that was just oozing from the seams. So these weren't some hidden flaws, right? They were visible, daily warnings of a deep structural sickness that the company just ignored. And then on that fateful day, two final factors came along and pushed the tank right over the edge. First, you had this sudden warm-up in temperature, which made the molasses thinner and increased the stress on the walls. Second, the molasses was fermenting, which created carbon dioxide gas inside the sealed tank. That combination of rising temperature and gas buildup, well, it was the final straw for the already brittle steel. But the horror didn't stop with that initial wave. The very nature of molasses created a second, and in some ways a more insidious threat for the victims and for the people trying to rescue them. You see, the threat had this dual nature. In those first few moments, the molasses acted like a powerful, liquid battering ram, causing massive, blunt force trauma. But as it spread out and hit the cold winter air, its viscosity just shot up. It rapidly thickened into this sticky, semi-solid mass that trapped people and animals like quicksand, leading to a slow, horrible death by asphyxiation. And the cleanup? It was a complete nightmare. The most logical idea, right, was to use fire hoses to pump salt water from the harbor to wash it all away. But all that really did was spread the sticky brown mess even further, turning the entire harbor brown and fouling up basements and subway tunnels for months on end. For years after, the North End was known as the Sticky District. So once the initial chaos started to subside, the city demanded answers. They wanted accountability. And what followed was one of the first major class action lawsuits against a corporation in American history. And it set a whole new precedent for corporate responsibility. Now, the company, United States Industrial Alcohol. They tried to blame the disaster on anarchists, claiming the tank was bombed. But after a 6-year legal battle that involved a ton of expert testimony, basically pioneering the field of forensic engineering, the court found the company 100% responsible. The failure was because of shoddy design and negligence, period.
The financial penalty was significant. The company was ordered to pay damages that would be equivalent to over $10 million today. It sent a very clear message. Cutting corners on public safety has a steep, steep price.
But, the true legacy of this flood isn't really the money. It's how this bizarre tragedy fundamentally changed the way we build our world. It forced a whole new era of safety and professional accountability. The disaster forced engineers and lawmakers to ask a really fundamental question. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a man-made failure. So how do you actually legislate against that kind of catastrophic negligence? Well, the answer came in the form of regulations that are totally standard practice today, things we take for granted. Laws were passed all across the country requiring that professional, licensed engineers had to review and sign off on building plans. It became mandatory to submit structural calculations for public approval and to conduct regular safety inspections. These are the direct descendants of the Great Boston Molasses Flood. Ultimately, the story of the flood is just a timeless lesson. It proves that a catastrophe doesn't require some exotic technology or extreme conditions. Nope. All it takes is a mundane material at an industrial scale combined with a management culture that decides to ignore basic science for the sake of speed and profit. And that's really the thought I want to leave you with. The knowledge to prevent this disaster existed back in 1919. The variables were all known. They were calculable. The failure wasn't one of ignorance. It was one of choice. And it's just this powerful reminder that the most critical element in any engineering project isn't the steel or the concrete. It's the commitment to actually apply what we know to keep people safe.